Any members, any questions before we get started? All right, I guess we should get started. Chair lays out House Bill 327 and recognizes Dean Thompson to explain the measure.
Mr. Chairman, may I present the bill to the committee from this position, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you. I want you to know that the current Texas duress defense does not allow juries to consider defendants' past trauma before determining whether the defendant felt coerced to participate in the criminal act. It only allows an affirmative defense to prosecution if the force or the threat of force would render a person of reasonable firmness incapable of resisting the pressure. A person of reasonable firmness, as statutes currently define it, does not include someone who has become more susceptible to coercion than the average person because of traumatic events like sex trafficking or domestic violence. In June of 2020, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that in Texas versus Marino, that a person of reasonable firmness is not someone who has become more susceptible to coercion because of a traumatic event and present evidence of past traumatization from being relevant to the affirmative defense of duress. Trauma is complex and is detrimental to a person's ability to reason and to function in a healthy manner. Trauma bonds or emotional bonds with another person that stems from recurring abuse that is perpetuated by the abuser's reward or punishment for certain action. And the people who are most vulnerable to experiencing duress are human trafficking and domestic violence victims. This bill would allow juries to consider whether the force or threat of force would render a reasonable person in the situation of the defendant incapable of resisting the pressure. The proposed change would protect our most vulnerable, traumatized Texans from prosecution for crimes induced by coercion from their abusers. Mr. Chairman, I know there may be witnesses here, and I would like to reserve the right to close, but I am available for questions from this excellent jury committee.
Thank you, Dean Thompson. Members who have any questions before we move to testimony? Nope. All right, we do have a few witnesses registered. Chair calls Elizabeth Hennecke. I show you registered as Elizabeth Hennecke, representing Lone Star Justice Alliance, testifying in favor of the bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead and begin.
Hi, everybody. I've been before you before. My name is Elizabeth Hennecke. I'm the CEO of the Lone Star Justice Alliance, and I represent kids. So I want to tell you why this bill is of critical importance to the children who I represent who have been sex trafficked. Imagine being an 11-year-old child who has been sold by your parent into a life of sex slavery. I actually represent such a kid who was trafficked from the age of 11 to the age of 14. And when she turned 14, her pimp decided that it would be appropriate to set up the sale of this 14-year-old kid. And during the middle of sexual acts that the Johns were performing on my client, he would then rob them under this theory that the Johns couldn't report the crime, right? Because they had just had sex with a minor. During such an incident, it happened at a hotel. It got quite out of hand. And my client actually, the police arrived and the pimp fled with my client through the streets. And ultimately, my client was arrested. She was arrested as participating in the armed robbery of the men who had been raping her. She was charged with the armed robbery and ultimately convicted in the state of Texas and given a 20-year sentence. My 14-year-old client was given 20 years. There was no dispute that she had been trafficked. The prosecutor acknowledged that fact, and yet we moved forward. And the reason was because the prosecutor informed me that she did not qualify for the duress. She had participated in the armed robbery, allegedly. And I said, surely that can't be the case. The night before, there are pictures showing that she had a gun put to her head. And that's when I learned about this issue. So under the statute right now, her past history with the person who had been trafficking her for 3 years was deemed irrelevant to whether or not she agreed to participate in that offense. Irrelevant. We were not allowed to present evidence of her past history with this man because it hadn't occurred. No beatings had occurred that day. No threats had occurred that day. And so it wasn't close enough to the offense that her relationship was deemed relevant. We have to change this. We cannot allow children who have been sex trafficked to not even be able to present to the jury the history of what had happened. This is not an isolated case. I have 3 current cases pending, which this bill will not apply to, unfortunately, but 3 cases pending in which there's similar facts. This is happening all around Texas, and I beg you to consider a very modest proposal here, which is simply to allow our clients to plead the evidence of their past relationship and determine whether a reasonable person with that history would have acted the same way that they acted. Because most of us, if we're 14 years old and we've been trafficked and beat for 3 years, if someone asked us to rob someone, would probably feel compelled to follow through. It's a simple proposal. Arizona already does it. 33 other states does it. It's time for Texas to join the majority. Happy to answer questions, but ask that you vote for the bill.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have questions at this time?
Thank you all.
No, thank you. Chair calls Rhonda Kuykendall. I have you registered as Rhonda Kuykendall, representing the Texas Human Trafficking Survivor Leader Council and yourself, testifying in favor of the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead and begin.
Sure. Over recent years, there's been an increase in laws to combat sex trafficking, but there is a population that's being harmed, and it doesn't seem like anyone is talking about it. Sex trafficking victims are often seen as criminals. The existing law ignores the context of coercion, which is very, very frequently used in sex trafficking. So as victims facing charges, we are prevented from explaining how being drugged, beaten, raped, and trafficked over a period of time made us do as we were told. Traffickers use our victims as a shield to protect themselves from being punished for their crimes. And while we have expungement, clemency, and vacator statutes, preventing the conviction from the very beginning is the best option. Texas's narrow duress statute should expand its language because it does not sufficiently protect victims. Victims are coerced into specific actions, and we shouldn't be penalized due to fear. A defendant's history of victimization is a crucial factor that should be introduced during a Texas trial. And I leave you with this. I have a very close friend of mine who was able to escape trafficking. She went through tremendous amounts of therapy. She got her college degree. But to this day, still, she cannot volunteer at her child's school. This bill will give her a voice, and it'll give the hundreds of victims also who are under duress when they commit a crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you have something for us there? No. Members, do we have questions? Yes, Vice Chair Cook.
How does the bill give her a voice? I mean, I'm sympathetic to the purpose of the bill, but how does this bill give her a voice?
This would have been a voice for her if she would have been able to have that, so those convictions would have never occurred from the beginning. She has gone through extensive work trying to use expungement, which is a very difficult process. So I guess the point is, if there was never a conviction in the very beginning, then this wouldn't have happened to her, and she would be able to volunteer at her child's school today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chair calls Torey Tipton. I have you registered as Torey Tipton, testifying on behalf of Allies Against Slavery in favor of House Bill 327. Is that correct?
That is correct,
All right,
yes,
go
sir.
Ahead and begin.
Thank you, Chairman Moody and members of the committee. My name is Torey Tipton. I'm with Allies Against Slavery, and I am here in strong support of House Bill 327. At Allies Against Slavery, we operate Lighthouse, which is the largest, contains the largest human trafficking screening tool for the entire state of Texas. And we know through that data, over 80,000 screenings, that there are 3,500 kids in Texas juvenile justice right now that scored the highest level of risk for trafficking, which is called clear concern. So we know that there are at least 3,500 kids in our system right now that have committed a crime while under while experiencing human trafficking. So we are in strong support of this bill. You've heard personal stories, but I would also encourage you to think about that large number of kids that are in our care today that have experienced this.
Understood. Thank you for raising that issue as well. Members, do we have questions? No? Thank you so much. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 327 at this time? The chair sees none and recognizes Dean Thompson to close on the measure.
Mr. Chairman, members, this bill passed the House unanimously last session of the legislature with bipartisan support. All we're asking for is mercy. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no objection, the bill will be left pending. Is there any objection? The chair hears none, and House Bill 327 is left pending at this time. Chair lays out House Bill 2897 by Representative Wally and recognizes Representative Wally to explain the measure.